On the first day of on the first Friday of February, my father missed Walter Cronkite in the CBS Evening News because he was spending almost the whole day getting ready for the formal presentation of the Chamber of Commerce Businessmen in 1967 award at the Kiwanis Club that night. Actually, we were all spending a lot of time getting ready for the Kiwanis Club because my mother and sister were wearing long gowns and my father and I were wearing tuxedos, which are uncomfortable and don't fit right and come with shoes made for people with very wide feet. My sister had used most of the getting ready time to complain, especially about the stupid purple orchid that the Kiwanis Club had sent and which she had to pin onto her shoulder. It didn't help when I pointed out that I had to wear a white carnation in my lapel and that wearing purple orchid wasn't nearly as bad. And it really didn't help when I pointed out I had to wear white feathers on my butt and that wearing a purple orchid really wasn't as bad as that. And it really, really didn't help when my father pointed out that she wanted to be a flower child, and so here was her chance. "You don't take anything I believe seriously, do you?" she said to him. "Tie your hair back from your face," she said. She went upstairs to the bathroom to tie her hair back from her face. I went up after her. "You should take the orchid and flush it down the toilet," I said. She looked at me. "Why don't you take your carnation and flush it down the toilet? Maybe I will." She pointed towards the toilet. "Go ahead." But I didn't have to flush my carnation down the toilet because right then a whole series of low chords sung from the piano in the perfect living room below us, followed by a roar and crash. An entirely new plastered ceiling fell smashing down the top of the baby grand piano, ripping the plastic seat cushions, flattening like the fake tropical flowers, tearing the gleaming mirror from the wall and spreading its glittering shards onto the floor where they mixed with the dank, wet plaster that immediately began to settle into the carpet to stain it forever. All four of us stood in the hall, the sickly smell of mold in our nostrils. If the committee that chose the Chamber of Commerce businessmen in 1967 have heard of what my father had to say about the carpenters and plasterers who have come to fix our living room ceiling, they might not have given him the award, since one of the requirements was that the nominee had to support the general business atmosphere of the town, and that my red-faced father was hollering and swearing that he's going to decrease the number of the town's business by 2, and he was shredding the white carnation as he said this, which probably was what Shylock would have done if he had been wearing a white carnation after being cheating out of his ducats. It was a good thing that neither the carpenters nor the plasterers were at the Kiwanis Club that night. We drove there in silence just before we walked into the club. I took off my carnation and handed it to my father. He took it without a word while my mother pinned it to his lapel. I held my flowers label out to my sister and smirked. She smiled back very sweetly. Then, as soon as we had gotten inside, she excused herself, went to the ladies' room, and came back without her orchid. She was still smiling sweetly when she leaned down and whispered, "It's down the toilet, you little jerk." Soon we were both flowerless, and we went to the reception hall, but no one would have seen the flowers anyway, since the hall was so dark. The only light came from the candles on the tables, the lit ends of cigarettes, and the lamps on the head table, which shone off the fake paneling on the wall behind. My father sat up there, and the rest of us sat below him at the center table with the wives of the Kiwanis Club officers. My mother refused an offered cigarette. I could tell this wasn't easy, and then she chattered to the Kiwanis' wives while my sister and I sat silently for dinner: roast beef and mashed potatoes and buttered lima beans, and for dessert, lemon mandarin pie and a whole lot more mandarin and lemon than the opening greetings and speeches, and through my father's speech of grateful acceptance. He was still red in the face when he got to speak, and you could tell he was looking out the audience for the carpenters and the plasterers, but he made it through without any hollering and swearing, and everyone clapped when he talked about growing business opportunities of the town, and how he was glad to be part of it all, and how someday he hoped to leave a thriving and prosperous business in a thriving and prosperous town to his son to carry a good name of hood associations. Lots of clapping at this. When everyone at the head table looked down at me, I smiled and nodded like I was supposed to, since I'm the son who is going to inherit the Hood and Associates. My sister kicked me under the table. Toads beetled bats. When we got home that night, my father phoned the carpenters and plasterers. He told them that he didn't care it was late on a Friday night, and he didn't care that tomorrow was Saturday. They would better be out of the house first thing in the morning, ready to fix the ceiling permanently, and to offer restitution for the property damages and their carelessness has caused. They were there first thing in the morning. If I had anything to say about it, which of course I didn't, I would have had the carpenters and plasterers head over to Camellia Junior as soon as they were done with the perfect living room, because the ceiling in our classroom is going to be a bigger and bigger problem as the weeks went by, and Mr. Garvishis and Mr. Gunquillery couldn't trap, poison, snag, snare, net, corner, maim, coax, or even convince the rats to give themselves up. 8 asbestos ceiling tiles had started to bulge down, which meant that either Sycorax and Caliban were getting fatter or the ceiling was getting weaker. Every morning Miss Baker looked up at the bulges to inspect them, and every morning she looked a little more nervous. So suppose she looks up there and sees that they chewed holes in the tile, and they're looking back down at her. What happens then? I said to Danny. You know that sound the bus driver made just before she hit you? I remember that sound. It wasn't anything compared to what Miss Baker would do. We waited hopefully, but then the 8 bulging tiles stayed intact. At the beginning of February, Miss Baker had assigned me Romeo and Juliet. I read it in 3 nights. Let me tell you, these two wouldn't make it very far in Camellia Junior High. Never mind that Romeo wears tights, at least according to the pictures, but he isn't very smart, and Juliet isn't too strong in that department either. I mean, a potion to almost kill you. She drinks a potion to almost kill you. Who would drink a potion to almost kill you? Then Romeo goes ahead and drinks the potion that will kill you, because he can't figure out that she only had a potion that almost killed you. And then Julia, who is at least smart enough to figure out that Romeo is dead, makes sure she uses the knife this time, which is not almost going to kill you, but will kill you. Doesn't this sound like something that 2 people who can't find the way around the block would get themselves into? Of course it does. Miss Baker couldn't see this problem at all because she's a teacher and no teacher ever does. Did you find it tragic and beautiful and lovely? She asked me when I told her I'd finished reading it. See? Not really, I said. What did you find it then? Stupid. There we have an opinion that overturned 375 years of critical appreciation. Is there a particular reason you find it stupid? Because they never would have done what they did. Fall in love? All the stuff at the end. The poison and the knife, she said? Yes, they would have never done that. Miss Baker considered this for a moment. What would they have done? Gone to Mantua together? And their parents? Ignored them. I'm not sure if life's quite simple as that. These are star-crossed lovers. Their fate is into their own hands, and they have to do what's already been decided for them. That's why it's so tragic and beautiful and lovely. You see, tragic and beautiful and lovely again. Why not just stupid and dumb? Meryl Lee thought it was wonderful that I was reading Romeo and Juliet, since having inspired by the Long Island Shakespeare Company holiday extravaganza, she was reading it too. Don't you think it's romantic, Holling? I guess so. And you're reading it just before Valentine's Day, yeah? The most romantic day of the year. Don't you love the balcony scene? She clasped her hands and held them beneath her chin. Oh, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore out thou, Romeo? Mary Lee, let's get somewhere together for Valentine's Day. I turned around to look behind me. Someone else must have said, popped out my mouth. What? Said Mary Lee. I was still trying to figure out how that popped out. I think this must have been because of Miss Baker and her Shakespeare's expressing something about what it needs to be a human being, and the tragical, beautiful, and lovely routine. It had all gotten into the air and mixed together, and the first thing you know, after you start breathing that stuff, you say things like I said to Mary Lee. But what can I do now? So I said it again. Let's go get somewhere together for Valentine's Day. She put her hand on her hip and thought for a moment. Then, no, she said. In this case, you're missing it. It's the tragic part. Why not? I said. Because you called me a blind mole, and then you acted like a jerk about your father winning the Baker Sporting Emporium contract. That was 3 months ago, and I did not act like a jerk. You still call me a blind mole and hope, so let me see if I can get this right. You hope that the unwholesome dew from a wicked fen would drop on me. That was actually a wicked dew from an unwholesome fen. But I'm a lot smarter than Romeo, and I know when to shut up. Now here comes the lovely part. Merrily, I said, there's lies more peril in thine eye than 20 of their swords. Look foul but sweet. 20 of whose sword? It's Shakespeare, I said. It doesn't have to make sense. They just have to be words more beautiful than have ever yet been written. So mole and blind are 2 words more beautiful than have ever yet been written. Had I written it, I would tear the world. Merrily smiled. All right, she said, I'll go. I told you that was the lovely part, even though I still can't figure out whose words popped out of my mouth. That night, I sat for supper trying to decide where I could take Merrily on an allowance I had to string together for 3 weeks to get some cream puffs. There was a moment, this will tell you how desperate I was, when I thought I might ask Mr. Goldman about another play. But it might be Romeo and Juliet, and that'll need more tights, and not for the whole wide world is gonna wear tights again. So I asked my mother, where could I take someone with $3.78? Then the supper table quieted. Well, she said, I suppose for an ice cream cone. It's February, I said, then maybe to Wolford's for a hamburger and a Coke. Wolfworth's? She shrugged, and then to a movie afterwards. My mother was not powerful at arithmetic. Who are you taking? Asked my father. Merrill Lee who? Merrill Kowalski. Merrill Kowalski, the daughter of Paul Kowalski, the Kowalski and Associates. I guess, I said. He laughed. You better hurry. Why hurry? If Hood and Associates get the junior high school contract, and we intend to, then Kowalski and Associates may very well be no more. He laughed again. Take her to Woolworth's, said my sister. Really? Really, then she'll know you're a cheapskate and dump you on the first date. You think that saving someone's life is all it's cracked up to be, and that the savee should swear eternal loyalty and grat to the saver. You don't know the part about how the savee, if she has a picture of her buttocks published on the Hometown Chronicle, has no further obligations to the saver. If my father was sounding more arrogant than usual, it's because he had brought home a scale model of his design for the new junior high school, and he figured it was a winner. And looking at it sitting on the dining room sideboard where all the silver had been pushed to the edges to make room for it, I thought he might be right. No pillars, he pointed out, no brickwork, no symmetrical layout. Everything had to be new and modern. So there were curved corners and curved walls. The roof was a string of domes all made out of glass. They arched over the main lobbies, gyms, and clusters of science and art classrooms. When I pointed out that the building wasn't quite square, he pointed out this was 1968 after all, and times were changing. Architecture should change too. He pushed back in his chair and walked over to the model and took off his top hat. Look at this interior, he said. Open hallway that rises 3 stories to the domes. Every classroom looks out into a sunlight space. No one's ever come up with that concept for a junior high school before. Like I told you, it was a winner, but it didn't help me plan a $3.78 evening for Valentine's Day with Merrill Lee. And after supper, while my sister washed and I dried, she was even more helpful than she had been before. What are you going to give Merrill Lee before you go on your date? She said. It's not a date, so why should I give her something before we go? Of course it's a date. You have to give her something like flowers or candy. Don't you know anything? It's Valentine's Day. I have $3.78. Then buy a rose. Have the florist put a ribbon on it or something. Merrill Lee will figure out that you're a cheapskate soon enough anyway. I'm not a cheapskate. I just don't have enough money. My sister shrugged. It's the same thing. The next day I asked Danny where he'd take someone if he was going somewhere for Valentine's Day. I am going somewhere for Valentine's Day, he said. You are? I'm going up with my fee. You are? I said. He nodded. Where are you going? To Millerage Inn. Millerage Inn? You have to know that this is the most expensive place to eat, and you can go on the Eastern Seaboard. And afterward, my dad's going to drive to see Camelot. He is? Danny nodded again. Just swell, I said. You know, it's sometimes possible to hate your best friend guts. I figured out by the time Danny was done, he'd spend $17 or $18, and he'd probably buy her a rose too. Toads, beetles, bats. It's Wednesday before Valentine's Day for the cheapskate, Miss Baker. I read aloud the 2 last acts of Romeo and Juliet. It was okay, but Romeo was still a jerk. Come bitter conduct, come unsavory guide, foul to sprite pilot, now at once run on the thrashing rocks by seaside where he barked. Sure, if I was about to die for love, I think I could come up with something better than that. But I guess the rest is all right down in the tombs with torches and swords and stuff. Shakespeare needed to get more of that in. By the time we were done, Miss Baker was almost in tears. It was also tragic, beautiful, and lovely. You need to see us on stage, Mr. Hood. It's playing at the Festival Theatre on Valentine's Day. Go see it. Now aren't you glad I didn't ask Mr. Goldman about another play? I told you the next one would be Romeo and Juliet in tights. This is called foresight. It's probably saved me from more white feathers on my butt. I'm already taking Merrill Lee someplace on Valentine's Day, I told Miss Baker. Are you? Where are you taking her? Someplace that costs less that's over from the $3.78 after you buy a rose with a ribbon on it. That limits you somewhat. My sister says that Merrill Lee will think I'm a cheapskate. It's not how much you spend on a lady, it's how much you give her of yourself. Like Romeo? Like Romeo. She nodded. He didn't end up too well, I pointed out. No, she said, but Juliet never asked for anything but him. So, is that what Shakespeare wanted to express about being a human being? That, said Miss Baker, may well be a question for your essay examination on Romeo and Juliet. Next time, Wednesday, we'll review, and you'll write it's the week after that. No more than 150 questions test. No 150 questions test. You are ready to do more than that. I guess this was good news. On Valentine's Day, Mr. Goreski announced over the PA that Miss Biggio had baked Valentine's Day cupcakes for the junior high, and each class would send down a representative to pick up the class's allotted numbered cupcakes at 1 o'clock. I know this doesn't sound like a big deal, but let me tell you, Miss Biggio can bake cupcakes. You never want to turn down a Miss Biggio cupcake, even if it's all pastel pink with little heartstrings in the frosting. We thought about the cupcakes all day. We even smelled them baking, their beautiful and lovely cakey aroma wafting down from the halls. When the clock clicked to 1:05, Danny gently reminded Miss Baker about the cupcakes. He said that he hoped she hadn't forgotten them. Miss Hupfer, it has been your experience that I have forgotten anything, asked Miss Baker. Danny had to admit she had never forgotten anything. Miss Baker looked at her watch. I'm sure that Miss Biggio would have made a significant number. She went back to reading aloud tragic love poem by Alfred Lord Tennyson, who I guess couldn't figure out how to punctuate his own name. 1:14. Still waiting for Miss Baker to send down a representative for the cupcakes. Up above the albesto ceiling tiles, Caliban and Storks are stirring. Probably the smell of pink icing is now filling the hallways. 1:17. Still waiting. The bulging albesto ceiling tiles are vibrating. 1:18. Miss Baker finally sends me down to Miss Biggio. Danny tells me to hurry since he is always hungry. 1:18.5. I run in the hallways. Miss Biggio is waiting for me for a last tray of Valentine's Day cupcakes. She slid them along the kitchen tails, told me, and then slid me an envelope out. Open it. You want it for tonight. I opened it. Inside were 2 tickets for Romeo and Juliet at the Festival Theater. Miss Biggio, I said, they're season tickets, and I won't be using them tonight, so they'll just go to waste if you don't take them, and the gossip by papers is that you can use them, unless you want to be known as a cheapskate. Thank you, I said. I can use them. The night Miss Kowalski drove Merrill Lee and me to the Festival Theater to see a production of Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare for Valentine's Day. We sat in 2 seats in the center of the 3rd row. Merrill Lee held the red rose of a ribbon I had bought her, and Mr. Goldman played Friar Loris and winked at me from the stage. The poisoning and stabbing scene was okay, but I still think that Romeo's a jerk. They needed the ghost of Banquo up there to tell them to lay off the stabbing, or maybe Caliban. But Merrill Lee loved it all. She was sobbing by the time it was over. Wasn't it beautiful, she said as the lights came up. So tragic, I said. That's just the word, she said. We walked through the evening light to Woolworth's, where we sat in the lunch corner, and I ordered 2 coats. Let me tell you, it was just swell. We did the balcony scene together as nearly as we could until the guy behind the counter began to look at me like he wanted us gone. So I ordered 2 more Cokes to make him happy. I still had $1.37 left. I didn't want Merrill Lee to think I was a cheapskate. Are you going to play a part in another Shakespeare's play? Merrill Lee asked. I thought of her sobbing at the end of Romeo and Juliet. Of course, I said. That wasn't even a Presbyterian lie. It was a flat-out lie. But after doing the balcony scene with Merrill Lee, I wasn't going to tell her what a jerk Romeo was and how the only way I was going back into a festival theater stage was, well, there wasn't any way. Merrill Lee looked at her watch. My father will be here soon, she said. I hope he remembers. I sipped my Coke and hoped he forgot. All he does is work on the model for the new junior high school. He goes over and over it. He moves a pillar there and then he moves one here. Not classical enough, he says. It needs to look like the Capitol building. Classical. When Merrill Lee imitated her father, her eyes got large and her hands went up and she spoke low. She should be on the festival theater stage. Classical, 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 said Merrill Lee. There's hardly another word that comes out of his mouth. My dad doesn't have any pillars, I said. He's got his model all modern. Modern? I nodded. No pillars, no straight walks. So much glass that they'll need 3 Mr. Vendor to keep it all clean. That kind of modern, I asked the guy behind the counter for his pencil. He hesitated a second, since I guess he wasn't so sure about it. They handed it over and made me promise to give it back, and then I drew the glass domes over the main lobby and gym and science and art classrooms, and the curved corners and walls, and the clusters of classrooms looking out into sunlight space all over my white paper placemat. No one's ever come up with a concept for a junior high school before, I said. Merrill Lee stared at my drawing, then went back to sipping her Coke. Her hair is a burn. Did I tell you that I'm in the lights of Woolworths? It shimmered. Did you tell in the lights of Woolworths? It shimmered. Mr. Kowalski did remember to come. We finished our cokes, and I handed back the pencil to a guy behind the counter and merrily took my placement as a souvenir, and we walked to the car hand in hand. Mr. Kowalski dropped me off at my house, and I wasn't sure sitting in the back seat how to say goodbye to Merrily. But she said today, "'Tis almost morning," she said. "I would have thee gone. Sleep well upon thine eyes," I said. I didn't have to look at Mr. Kowalski to know that his eyes were rolling in his head. So that was Valentine's Day. The following week, the school board met to decide on the model for the new junior high school, which is probably why Mr. Kowalski is spending all his time muttering, "Classical, classical, classical." The meeting was to be at 4 o'clock in the high school administration building. Mr. Kowalski would present his plan and model, and then my father would present his plan and model. And then the school board would meet in private session to decide whether Kowalski and Associates or Hood and Associates would be the architect for a new junior high school. I know all of this because my father is making me come. It was time. I started to learn the business, he said. I needed to see firsthand how competitive bidding worked. I needed to experience architectural presentations, and I needed to see architecture as the blood sport that it truly was. Which made me think architecture sounded like a profession that Macbeth could have done pretty well in. The meeting was in a public conference room. When I got there after school, the school board members were all sitting at the head table studying the folders of the architectural bids. Mr. Kowalski and my father were sitting at the two high school desks, which made me think the whole thing seemed a little weirder than it needed to be. In front of them was a long table with two models for the new junior high school, each one covered with a white sheet like they were in some sort of national secret. I sat behind my father. There was a whole lot of preliminary agenda stuff and old business and procedural decisions and all that. My father sat through it coolly, occasionally looking at his watch or squaring the edges of his presentation notes. Mr. Kowalski was more nervous. I'm not sure that his cigarette was out of his mouth for more than 3 seconds at a time. "Mr. Kowalski, we're ready for your presentation now," said Mr. Bradbook, who was the chairman of the school board. He sat at the head of the table, sort of like God would sit if God wore a suit. He was smoking too, but he wasn't working as hard as Mr. Kowalski was. "You have 8 minutes," he said. Mr. Kowalski picked up his presentation notes and angled out of his seat. He went up to the table with the models and stood there for a moment. Then he turned and looked no, not my father, at me. "Really?" My father looked at him. Then he turned at me like I should know what's going on. But I didn't. I just shrugged. "7 minutes," said Mr. Bradbook. Kowalski cleared his throat twice. He looked at his design papers. He cleared his throat again. Then he looked back at me. Once more he began. "Gentlemen," he said, "though this is irregular, I have made some significant design changes for the interior of the new junior high since my original submission. In fact, the entire concept has changed markedly, so the plans that you studied for this afternoon's presentation I have also changed. I have copies of the new interior plans and ask the board's patience as I show you concept. This may take slightly longer than the allotted time, but I'm sure that the Chamber of Commerce businessmen of 1967 won't begrudge Kowalski and Associates for extra minutes in court to clarify the proposal and to promote the general business atmosphere of town." "This is irregular," said Mr. Bradbook. "Has the new concept changed affected the cost estimates?" "Not significantly," said Mr. Kowalski. Mr. Bradbook considered. "Well," he said, "if Mr. Hood will agree, I see nothing wrong with your presentation going slightly longer. Mr. Hood, what could the Chamber of Commerce businessmen of 1967 do?" He shrugged and nodded, but the back of his neck grew red as the boiling sun, and I knew he did begrudge extra time. He begrudged it a whole lot. Mr. Kowalski pulled off the sheet from his model in the junior high school. He cleared his throat again. "As you can see, gentlemen," said Mr. Kowalski, "the design is quite classical, in the best traditions of our national architecture for a time when our children desperately need to remind of our great American traditions." And it was. It looked like the Capitol in Washington, D.C. Wide steps swooped up past a line of pillars to the central doors above the rose-steeped dome, which thin windows cut around it. On each side of the dome in the building spread graceful wings, all with thin windows again, and behind the long gymnasium formed the tail, which rows of bright windows faced the south and north to let in as much light as any gymnasium could ever have. But we live in 1968, gentlemen, Mr. Crossley just said. Just as our children need to be reminded of great traditions, so too they need to enjoy the advantage of contemporary technology. I think you'll find the new interior design made both modern and innovative, the perfect blend of where we have been and where we are going to as a nation. He handed out copies of the plans for the new design to the school board members, keeping his back to my father and me the whole time. Then he took us through the new interior slowly. No pillars, no straight walks. The roof of serious glass plates above the science and art rooms. The central dome 3 stories high over the main lobbies and clusters of classrooms, all looking out into the sunlit space, all as modern as can be. I don't believe that anyone has come up with this blended concept for a junior high school before, said Mr. Kowalski. Then he sat back down. He did not look over at us. Instead, he lit another cigarette and began pulling at it. He shuffled all his papers into a folder. The school board was astounded. 3 of them applauded, not Mr. Bradfield. Since God doesn't applaud. My father turned and looked at me again. His face was very red. I could tell he was fighting for some type of control. Pauline, there's something you should tell me, isn't there? He whispered slowly. I looked at him. Do you think this is a game? This is the future of Hood and Associates. Everything rides on this. My future and your future. So what did you do? He used the type of voice that in my family means a voice a whole lot louder is about to come along in a minute or two, so you better start preparing. But let me tell you, I really didn't care all that much about what he would say or how loudly he would say it. I really didn't. Yet suddenly, I knew something a whole lot worse. Romeo was a genius compared to me. I haven't seen all what Mary Lou was doing on Valentine's Day when we were sipping Cokes at a lunch cooler in Woolworth. I didn't realize how easily she had gotten what she wanted from me. My father's design for the new junior high. Run on me and the dashing rocks hand me a vial of poison. I'm such a jerk. I'd probably drink it. I'm a bigger jerk even than Mickey Mantle. I got up before I began to bawl like a first grader. Hauling, warned my father, slightly louder whispered. I left the conference room. My red father never did tell me what he did for his presentation. Probably it began with him demanding to see Mr. Kowalski's plans, and then suggesting that he took these from Hood Associates. Not saying it outright, but just suggesting it, like he knew there was a truth but wouldn't say it. And then arguing that Mr. Kowalski should withdraw his proposal because it wasn't the same one he had submitted and it's not how honest businessmen worked. It would have been something like that, and with him getting redder and redder all the time. I bet if you were watching it, you'd be sure to have seen the architect of the blood sport, and Macbeth couldn't have been played any bloodier than my father. February is I can't decide what it wants to be a month. On Long Island, what's left of any snow has been melted into brown slush and runs in dirty ridges along street gutters. The grass is dank and dark. Everything is damp, as if the whole island had been dipped under water and is only starting to dry up. Mornings are always gray and cold. That's what it was like between Merrill Lee and me the next day at school. Slushy, damp, dirty, dark, gray, and cold. We didn't look at each other. At lunch we ate about as far away from each other as we could, and she went outside early, even though Merrill Lee hardly ever went outside. She didn't come to chorus, so I sang the soprano part for Miss Violet of Very Spiky Heels alone at our stand. When Miss Baker asked if I liked to partner up with Merrill Lee on the sentence diagram and exercise afternoon, I told her I'd rather do with Doug Switek. On Friday, things were still slushy, damp, dirty, dark, and cold. Merrill Lee wore sunglasses to school, even though it was gray like always. When Miss Baker asked her to remove the class, she said that her doctors asked her to keep him on, that she was supposed to keep him on for maybe the rest of the school year, and I was the only one in class who didn't laugh at that. I looked out the window. For the next Wednesday, I wrote an essay for Miss Baker about what Shakespeare wanted to express about being a human being in Romeo and Juliet. Here's the first sentence of my essay. What Shakespeare wanted to express about being a human being in Romeo and Juliet is that you better be careful who you trust. Here's the last sentence. If Romeo had never met Juliet, he would have been all right, but because he was star-crossed, he did meet her, and because she came up with all sorts of plans that she didn't bother telling him about, he ended up taking poison and dying, which is an important lesson for us to learn in life. I had Merrill Lee to thank for this. You know, if she hadn't done what she did, I would have never figured out what Shakespeare was trying to express in Romeo and Juliet about what it means to be a human being. When I handed the essay in, Miss Baker read it through twice. So she said, "Do you think Juliet was right to stab herself at the end of the play?" "Yes," I said. "I see." She put the essay in a manila folder and left it on top of her desk. But unlike Juliet, Merrily didn't style herself. In fact, that afternoon she was waiting out me outside the gates of Camilla Junior High and was standing beside a ridge of crusted snow that she had stomped down flat. It wasn't my fault, she said. Aren't you supposed to be at St. Albert's? I just showed him your drawing because it was good. I didn't know he'd use the same design. Sure, Merrily. It's true, she said. All right, it's true. Whatever you say, Merrily. You told him everything about my father's design, everything, and then a few days later he draws up new plans so on the inside of the school is just like the inside of my father's school. You had nothing to do with it. I didn't say I had nothing to do with it. I said I I said I didn't know he would use the same design. I'd keep the dark glasses on merrily. It's easier to lie to someone if they can't see your eyes. A long moment went by, then Merrily took off her glasses and threw them past my head. I think she was trying to throw them at my head. Then she turned and walked away, but not before I saw why she'd been wearing them. I picked up the glasses and put them in my pocket. That night I saw those glasses flying past my head again and again and again. Then I saw Merrily's red eyes again and again and again. Merrily wasn't in school the next day. I kept looking over at her empty desk. At lunch recess I wrote a new Romeo and Juliet essay in the letter. Here's the first sentence of the essay. What Shakespeare wanted to express about being a human being in Romeo and Juliet said it's hard to care about two things at the same time. Like caring about the Montague family and caring about Juliet too. Here's the last sentence. If Romeo had never met Juliet, maybe they both would have still been alive. But what they would have been alive for is the question that Shakespeare wants us to answer. I handed the essay to Miss Baker at the end of the day. She read it through twice. Then she took my old essay out of the manila folder, which was still on top of her desk, and put in the new essay. She dropped the old essay into the trash and put the new essay, into her desk. Then she looked at me. So what will you do now? She said. That night, with 79 cents left over from Fountain Day and $1 from Monday's allowance, I bought 2 Cokes and a rose of ribbon. I took them over to Merrily's house, rang the doorbell, and Mr. Krosky answered it. You're the hood boy, he said. Is Merrily home? I said. He opened the door further, and I came in. He hesitated. Then her room is the one at the top of the stairs, he said. I went up the stairs slowly. I felt his eyes on my back, but I didn't want to turn around and let him know that I felt his eyes on his eyes on my back. I knocked on Merrily's door. Go away, she said. I knocked again. I heard her chair scraping against the floor and her footsteps stomping across the room. Her door opened. I told you. Then she stopped. Her mouth was open. I thought you might be thirsty, I said. Her mouth was still open. Are you what? Am I what? Thirsty. She looked at the Coke in my hands. Yes, she said. I handed her the bottle and she pulled the opener out of my pocket. I handed her the bottle and pulled the opener out of my pocket. I love the sound of a brand new bottle of Coke when you pry the lid off and it starts to fizz. Whenever I hear that sound, I think of roses and sitting together with someone you care about, and of Romeo and Juliet waking up somewhere and saying to each other, weren't we jerks, and then having all that be over. That's what I think of when I hear the sound of a brand new bottle of Coke being opened. On Thursday, before the school board met to decide on its new architect, Kowalski and Associates withdrew its bid for the new junior high school. Hood Associates were given the contract. What chumps, said my father. They're going to win hands down. What chumps? He shook his head. They're bound to go under now, but if you can't play for keeps, you shouldn't be in the business in the first place. And Kowalski could never play for keeps. And the Hood Associations can. He rubbed his hands together like a Shylock on stage, and that's when something changed. I suddenly wondered if my father was really like Shylock. Not because he loved ducats, but because he had become that person that everyone expected him to become. I wondered if he had ever had a choice, or if he had ever felt trapped, or if he had ever imagined a different life. With his new contract, he was sure to bet for the Chamber of Commerce business in 1968. It's probably what everyone expected. For the first time I wondered if it was what he wanted, or if there was a time he might have wanted something else, or if I wanted something else, or if we were both only fortune's fools, like Romeo. Merrily and I are partners on Friday for census diagramming. We ate together at lunch and we decided to be partners for Mr. Petrillo's next geography assignment, which is on the California Gold Rush in you. Make it relevant, said Mr. Petrillo. We sang together in chorus for Miss Violet for the very spiky heels, and when it came to time at the end of the day to clean the board, we did that together too. And that's why we were at the board together when Mr. Garashi came into the classroom to give Miss Baker a yellow telegram, a telegram that she took out of the envelope, then read it and dropped onto the floor as she rushed out, leaving Mr. Guareschi standing in front of the class without any idea what to do. So I picked up the telegram, put it on our desk. Marilyn and I could hardly not read ourselves, or at least the words that mattered. Downed helicopter transport stop. Hessian stop. Baker missing in action stop.